Sorry, I was trying to fix my microphone. I got it now.
Looks like you got it now.
Yeah, it kicked me out, but I finally got it.
Were you able to get your hive split?
Yeah, Don Tomlinson, he come over and helped me actually. My hive is gone buck wild crazy. He said you could probably split it a couple more times. So it's very intimidating.
That's what happens this time of year when you have healthy hives.
Yeah, it's healthy for sure.
This is over when you've overwintered, right?
Yep, I got my hive last year. It was a new hive, new everything, and it overwintered really good. It was really strong going into winter, but nobody believed me how strong it actually was and stayed. It's I mean, it's huge. That's why I decided to do a split. And we took quite a few more frames out, and he said there's still enough to do another split and it still be really strong. So now I just got to decide if I want to split it again and let them make a queen, or if I don't want to test my luck anymore. Because I'm not that experienced to have three hives, I don't think. It's very much of a learning experience.
Uh, I think it's actually easier when you have multiple hives.
Maybe. I don't have a lot of land here, so I'm just on like a little half-acre plot with just fields all around me. So I have another spot if I don't move my old hive, because I was going to move my hive from where it is between my chicken coop and shed to over where the other hive is, but he recommended if I move it, I need to move it a couple miles away and then move it to the spot
And
because
then move
it'll
it.
disorient them or something. I don't know. They'll retrain themselves to going back, but he said if I just move it a couple feet, like I was going to, it might not work out very well.
Yeah, it doesn't work out super well when you just try to move them 20, 30 feet. That doesn't work very well. So the saying is 2 feet or 2 miles. So you can move a hive, a foot one way or another, 2 feet one way or another, and they'll find their way in. If you um, move them more than that, then they get lost. You can, if you move them about 2 miles away, though, then when they come out of the hive, they know they're in a different spot and they'll reorient themselves to the new location.
Yeah, I better probably just leave them where they're at and possibly do the third hive or just leave them be this year. I really don't want them to swarm. That's what I'm a little worried of. I mentioned to him last year I had a bunch of bees go out of the hive and they just kind of hung out in the center of a cinder block, just like I don't know, maybe a little bigger or a little smaller than a basketball size. They just hung out there. And then I like watched them, and then I come back and they were just gone. I figured they went back in the hive. So I don't know if I had a swarm last year already or what happened.
Yeah, that sounds like a swarm.
Yeah, that's what he was thinking as well.
They'll leave the hive and congregate in one spot for until they find a new place to go, and then they'll all go together. Sometimes
Does
that's an hour or two, and sometimes that can be a day or two.
so does that mean my original queen that was in there is gone?
Probably.
But did she swarm with it? Well, and I kind of thought that I either had, because I checked it shortly after that, and I was like, man, that doesn't look like my same queen. It looks smaller than the one I had. And Kirk and Anna, they're my father-in-law, mother-in-law. They said that I could have had two queens in there, but I mean, this hive's just—it's crazy.
Typically, the original queen will leave with the first swarm. That's what the books say. The bees don't read the book, so
I follow along with David Burns and I watch some of the IFA videos and then I ask lots of questions on your page because I that's how I learn.
It's all good. It's what it's there for. It's what it's there for.
I'm going to be going back and forth. So I'm going to be listening. So I'm going to mute myself and get my bread in the oven.
Chase, how are your hives doing?
Oh, they're doing really good. 24th, and they're bouncing back.
Good. How many do you have now?
I have 4 right now.
4.
Yeah, I've been out today all day learning how to handle the drones and stuff. I can sit out there and catch them all day. It's kind of fun.
Are you marking drones so you can learn how to mark queens?
Uh, I might. I don't know. I caught 2 of them today from one hive that had 2 mites on them. One of my hives has a high mite count.
Ah,
So I'm gonna see if I can get some of the drone comb in there and pull some of them out.
yeah, you got to get that under control quick. Because if
Yeah,
they're high my count now, then they're going to be way out of control in a month from now, right?
yeah,
So I would either, we're going to be rather hot for the next few days, but probably a little too hot. I would either use, normally in the spring, I like to use Formic. Next week, you'd be good to use it though.
okay,
My other choice would be to use Apiguard. The only thing with Apiguard though is you can't have a honey super on, whereas Formic you could have honey supers on still if they're that big.
yeah, yeah. I might try one of those soon. I'm not sure quite yet what I'm gonna do.
I should have had Chase come out today for an extra set of eyes. We still never found that sneaky queen.
Yeah, they can be tricky sometimes, though. They always happen to be on the last frame I check, almost every inspection.
I've only ever found the queen in this giant hive 2 times. And my daughter's helped me every time I've found her. But even today, we could not find her. I'm really, really hoping that I didn't split her in that hive. I looked them over very well, but there's no telling. I hope not. What are your thoughts on hives like honey supers and hives that have this? I got some from a lady, they have holes drilled in them, like on the honey supers and the hives themselves. What are your
So
thoughts on that?
extra entrances on hive boxes. Some people like them, some people don't. Are they necessary? No. I like an upper entrance during the summer for my hives. And some of the commercial guys will put an extra hole in their honey supers. The idea is when the bees go out and forage, if you only have a bottom entrance, one entrance to your hive, and typically that's at the bottom, right? If you only have one entrance, when the bees go out and forage and they bring nectar or pollen back, most of the time the pollen's going in the brood area. And the nectar is usually going up above that brood area. So what happens is the foragers go out and forage, they come back and they just go in the hive a little ways. They don't go all the way through the hive. They only go in a little ways and then they pass off their nectar load to a receiver bee, and the receiver bee goes up into the honey supers, deposits the nectar load, and then comes back down. That frees up the forager from having to go in the hive all the way up through the brood nest into the honey super, deposit the load, and then come back down to go out and forage again. They pass it off to a receiver bee, usually fairly near the entrance of the hive, and that receiver bee does that up and down through the brood nest. Well, if you only have one entrance, then that's all they can do. And it can cause a little bit of congestion in that brood nest area because you've got nurse bees working the brood, and then you've got forager or receiver bees going up and down, up and down, up and down. And by giving them another entrance, and the commercial guys will frequently do that right on a honey super. They'll just drill a hole in the box and give them a 3/4 inch or hole right in the side of the box. And some people have, like most of mine, have an upper entrance in the lid. And that allows those forager bees to come in through that upper entrance and deposit the honey, or pass the nectar load off to a receiver bee right there close to that entrance. And the receiver bees not working their way up and down through the brood area. So it relieves a little bit of that congestion when there's a nectar flow going on. Now in the winter, it may be a different story. That's a whole different discussion as to whether you should have ventilation for winter or not. And we can get into that later in the year, but for the summer, I like an upper entrance. And if your boxes don't have an upper entrance, you can actually, and you don't want to drill holes in your boxes. Sometimes you don't want to do that. I don't particularly want to do that. Sometimes all I'll do is I'll just take the honey super and I'll either just twist it just a little bit and set it on the box below it. So it's just skewed just enough that it creates an entrance on the corners or something, or you can just push it back and leave like a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch gap in the front or the back. It doesn't really matter. And it just creates a second entrance for them. Is there a possibility that rain could get in there? Yes. Is it a big deal? Typically not. The bees don't, it's not usually a problem. So that's a couple of ways. When your hive gets stacked up, 4, 5, 6 boxes high, that's a lot of volume that doesn't have as much air circulation in it. And by pushing the one box back, maybe the second from the top or something, pushing it back just a little bit and creating a gap along the front of the hive or the back of the hive, it doesn't matter which way you push it, and just creating a little bit of a gap along there to where you can either, if you push it back far enough that the bees can get in and out, now they have an upper entrance. If you just push it back far enough that there's a crack, but there's not enough room for the bees to come and go out of that crack, now you've created basically a ventilation aid for the bees to help ventilate and pull off some of that hot air that can accumulate in the hive. The bees are, generally speaking, really good at managing the temperature within the hive. And in the summer, if you watch your hive, if you've got your hive entrance all the way open, you've removed that entrance reducer. Sometimes in the summer, in the middle of the day, you'll find some bees at the front of the entrance, right there on the landing board. And on one side, they're facing one direction, like they're facing towards the entrance. And then on the other side, they're facing away from the entrance. And they're standing there and they're fanning their wings. And what they're doing is they're actually creating a convection current within the hive. They're pushing air in and pulling air out of the hive. They're really pretty good about managing that, not only the temperature in the hive, but the humidity level in the hive. But around here, it can get, we start hitting that 95, 100 degree days. It can get just too overwhelming for them to do that themselves. So I find giving them a little bit of a crack, especially those great big hives, you've added 3 honey supers. I'll push that top honey super back a little bit and give them some extra breathing room. Sometimes I push it back if I think they need a little more, if they needed an extra entrance, I'll push it back far enough that they can come and go out of that. And other times I just push it back just far enough that they can't get through it, but it gives them some air circulation. So that's what those holes in the boxes are for. Just give those forager bees a way to get in and out without having to go down through the bottom and have those receiver bees go up and down through the brood area. It relieves some of that congestion.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good question. It's one of those things we don't think about very often. Is we just think, well, the bees have their entrance. They come and go through the front door, and they don't always have to do that. Oh, Lorraine, what's up?
Okay, did that work?
There you go.
So I missed her question, but it sounded really interesting, but I just now figured out how to get on here. What was her question about the give them an alternate entrance thing there?
Her question was, she has seen sometimes people will actually drill an extra hole in the side of their box, like the front of one box, especially their honey supers. And why would we do that? And the answer is basically to give them an extra entrance.
We don't worry about robbing in that case.
Not robbing can be a problem, but not usually during a nectar flow. So from here till I don't know, depends on what the weather does, but from here till probably end of July, there's usually enough nectar out there that the bees aren't really concerned about robbing each other.
Right.
We're just about to kick in the nectar flow. We haven't really started yet. I'm seeing a little bit of nectar come in, but they're consuming as much nectar as they're bringing in, basically. I have
Yeah.
a few hives that have stored a little bit of nectar here and there, but most of it's getting consumed as quickly as it comes in.
So if it's any problem, if you see some robbing, you just what? Stick
close-
stick
close it
some
off.
screen over it. Yeah. Thank you.
Some guys will use just like a cork and just cut the holes in their boxes, just making the same size as whatever cork size they have. And if they start to see robbing, they just plug it with a cork. Piece of tape, duct tape over the entrance works just as well. So what's everybody else seeing in their hives? I was out checking some of my hives today. I'm seeing, like I said, just a tiny bit of nectar coming in, not tons. I'm still seeing tons of pollen coming in. And I think they're consuming whatever nectar they're finding as quickly as they're bringing it in. So they're not really storing it yet. I've got a few hives that are storing it, but not really to any quantities. They need that nectar and the incoming pollen so they can raise brood. The biggest thing I'm watching really close is swarming. We're going to be in, and Laura knows this already, we're going to be in swarm mode from here till really middle to end of June. Is by that time we usually have kind of, if they're going to swarm, they've already done it by then. But for the next month, we're right in swarm season for around here. I caught one of my hives today, I think just barely in time. If you get into your hive and you're seeing swarm cells, that means they're already in that mindset. If those swarm cells are capped, there's a good chance your hive has already swarmed. The hive I got into today had a capped swarm cell. They had 3 or 4 other swarm cells that were not capped, but they had one that was capped, and I thought, oh dear, they've probably already swarmed.
See, and I'm just not that good yet to realize what a swarm cell is, I don't think. I guess I need to research that a little bit more. Maybe I would have realized that's what they were doing last year if that's what they did.
Well, let's bring up some photos so you can see.
And those are right on the comb inside the frame usually, not on the bottom or the top or anything like that.
Well, we've kind of got two styles going on here. Let me maybe go to the next. So you're gonna see these all over the place. We call them queen cups. If there's nothing in it, it's a queen cup. Once they place an egg in there, then we call it a queen cell. And your hive is going to make queen cups all over the place this time of year. You'll see a dozen or so kind of all over the place, especially on the bottom bars. If you pull up the frame and look at the bottom, you'll see them all over the place. If you see, these are queen cells, right? They're kind of a peanut shape. If you only see one or two and it's kind of on the upper half of the frame, but you're only seeing one or two on one frame out of the whole box, that's going to be a supersedure cell. That means the queen's probably getting old. There's something about the queen that they're saying, time to replace. Something's up with her. Age is typically the problem, but she may have gotten injured or she's just not producing as well as she should. And they'll create a couple of supersedure cells and just raise one or two, maybe three. If you look at the bottom of the frame and you start seeing these queen cells hanging off the bottom of your frame, typically those are going to be swarm cells, and there'll be more than one. There'll be more like 4, 5, 7, 12. Sometimes they just go nuts. There'll be multiple of them, and you'll also see, here's a queen cup. There's nothing in this one, and they haven't drawn it out. They formed it. It's all ready to go, but they haven't drawn it out and made it big enough. These two are capped and ready to go. The queens are in here. She's head down, so her head's down at the bottom of those cells. Typically, this time of year, if you start seeing these swarm cells, your hive they're already in swarm mode. They're already in that frame of mind of, we're going to swarm. And it's a little bit tricky to try to get them out of this mode right here. So there's your pictures. Does that help?
Yeah. I just I didn't see anything like that when we was in there today, but when you do your hive checks, do you usually go through both? Like I have two deeps. Do you usually take them apart and go through both of them?
I check as many frames as I need to, with the idea is I'm going to check as few of frames as possible.
That's what as long as I can see, like when nectar starts coming in and pollen and brood, cat brood, all that fun stuff. I usually try to leave them alone.
Yeah, as long as I'm seeing eggs and I see that the queen's got plenty of room to continue laying, then I'm pretty well, and I'm checking for these. So here's a good picture. Here's one frame. Here's number one's got a swarm cell already capped. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are not capped, but they're swarm cells. They're starting to draw those cells down and elongate them. But this hive right here is in swarm mode. And it gets a little bit tricky to try and stop them at this point. You can, and the typical instinct of most beekeepers is when they see this is, oh, we're not gonna let you swarm, and they'll go cut all of these down. And then all of a sudden they'll decide, well, where's my queen? And they go looking for a queen and they decide, oh, wait a minute, I don't have a queen, because they have already swarmed. And
So
since they don't have a queen and they just cut down all these swarm cells, they've just eliminated any possibility of raising a new queen.
how do you stop a swarm? Like the one last year, would I have been able to stop it where they were already outside of the hive, but they were still
Yeah,
super close to the hive?
They've already swarmed at that point. They'd
Okay.
already gone through this whole process of raising queen cells.
And I never seen anything like that in my hive, and I checked it
They're
quite often.
can be tricky to find. They'll chuck them up in a corner and see number 5 over here. If they've got bees covering it, it's hard to tell.
True.
It's hard to see.
And it could have been in that bottom box. They didn't mess with the bottom box very much just because they were doing so well. I never seen any sign of any struggling for them. So I just kind of let them be, done my mite checks, and yeah, especially where it was everything was brand new. The hive was new, the frames were new, it was drawn out very well. And so I just kind of stepped back and let them be their little bees.
Yep. So typically all I'll do this time of year, I'm not going through every frame looking for these swarm cells, because they're going to be on the bottom. And so what I do is I just tip that, in your case, the second brood box, the second deep, I just tip it up on its end and I just look down the frames and look at the bottom bar. And I'll see queen cells that don't have anything in them up and down the bottom bars. They're all over the place. As soon as those cells, they start to draw those cells out and make them longer, now there's something in them. And you can take your hive tool and kind of open them up just a little bit to see if there's something in there. If there's a puddle of royal jelly in them, they've started. After those cells have gone through their whole process, this one with the red arrow, that's a queen cell that the queen's emerged out of. And then the one behind it, the queen hasn't emerged yet. And you can tell this queen has emerged by this telltale sign is she's chewed a circle out and there's a little flap door, that little flap that's hanging there still. That tells me this queen has emerged and she's running around in the hive somewhere. The ones on the other picture, notice the ends of them are still closed on most of them, but the sides have all been chewed out by the bees. Most likely what happened in the other picture is one queen emerged, maybe the one on the left emerged. It's hard to tell in this picture. It's a little bit old. But one queen emerged and then she went around and killed the other queens that were still in their cells. She chewed out the side and stung them through the side of the cell, killed them in their cell. And then the worker bees have come back, opened the cell up even more and drug out the pupae, the dead queen pupae, and got rid of it.
Okay, that's a lot. That's helpful.
Okay, so you're going to see lots of drones right now. You're going to see lots of drone comb in your hives, and especially between the frames. Because if you're using plastic foundation in your frames, then the cell size that's imprinted on those foundation is for worker brood. And that doesn't leave the hive anywhere to put drone brood. And sometimes they'll completely rework a section of drone comb of worker comb and make it drone size. And that's what you're seeing a little bit here in the bottom right picture. Those cells underneath the plastic foundation underneath that are all worker size, but the bees have reworked those and made drone size cells out of them. And you're going to see that. And when they don't have any room to do that, then they'll build comb between the boxes, and they'll put the drone. The queen will lay drone comb there. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Can you so the split screen that you just had, the two pictures, can you go, I'm not sure I'm understanding what the difference is.
Okay, hang on here.
Sorry, I should have asked before you
No,
put it away.
it's okay. Let me put it back. I'm trying to make sure there's nobody else waiting here. Okay. Back to the picture. Okay, so this the pictures was for kind of a little different discussion, but we can go down this path too. Since it's queen related, let's talk about it a little bit. The picture on the right, the bottom right picture, is normal drone comb. And notice what's kind of happening here. I've got drone comb down in the bottom corner, and then the rest of it looks like worker size comb. All nice and flat, and then the drone comb's bubbly. Looks like 22 bullets all stacked together, right? That's a normal pattern. That looks great. There's nothing wrong with that. The other picture, look at what's going on. It's drone comb, but it's really wavy. It's not quite the same. They're not. The queen hasn't laid in every cell, and the cells that she hasn't laid in aren't the same depth as the drone comb around it. They're much shallower in the ones that she has not laid in, the empty ones. Those are much more shallow than the ones that are full, that have a drone in them. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, it does. Yeah, like I see
Okay.
that in the picture now.
And what's happening in this picture is most likely this queen has gone drone layer. She's ran out of sperm to fertilize the eggs, but she doesn't really know that. And so she's just happily going along, laying eggs, away she goes. But the workers can sense whether that egg has been fertilized or not. And they're going along and they're going, oh, not fertilized, not fertilized, not fertilized. And so they understand that if it's not fertilized, that's a drone, and they have to make the cell bigger. And so they're drawing that cell and making it deeper and bigger for that one egg that's unfertilized. And then they get to the next one and they're like, oh, another unfertilized. And they have to draw it out. And then they've got one that's empty and another one that's empty and another one that's full, and back and forth. So you get this really spotty brood pattern.
Okay.
And as you looked through this hive over the course of a couple of weeks, you would begin to notice that the amount of worker brood is either diminishing and the amount of drone brood is increasing, or there is no worker brood and it's all drone, all of it. That's a telltale sign that the queen has gone drone layer on you. She's ran out of sperm. And there's not, at this point, it's requeen. You need a new queen.
Would they replace her?
Not necessarily, because she's still a laying queen. They look at her and say, oh, she's still laying. She still smells right. It still seems right. So they wouldn't normally replace her. They might, but the odds are they would probably not. And because you now only have worker brood and all her eggs are unfertilized, the hive can't raise a new queen because there are no fertilized eggs for them to work with to raise a queen with. Everything's a drone.
So that's past the point that she could go for them to replace the queen.
Yep,
'Cause they-
most likely.
okay.
Yep, the only thing to do is is bring in another frame from another hive with fertilized eggs, or bring in another queen, another mated queen preferably.
Right, unless it was that time of the year and you couldn't get one.
Right, unless it's that time of year and you can't get one, and that happens, you know, sometimes this happens in October, you know, your last hive check and you're like, oh, there's only drone comb left. And they long since quit raising drones, you know, end of August, they're not raising drones at that time of year anyway. But if you get in your hive in September and October and you're seeing a whole bunch of drone comb, that queen ran out of sperm, and that hive is not going to make it till winter. At that point, I would give up on the hive. I would take the bees, combine them with I would kill the queen and combine what remaining bees there are with another hive. Because you can't save it.
Okay.
If it
All right.
was August and this was happening, then I would go, oh, see if we can find somebody that's got a mated queen that'll sell you a mated queen in August. Drop a mated queen in here, you know, get rid of the old queen and drop a mated queen. You still got a month and a half to kind of let her get going and maybe rebuild a little bit. It's risky, but maybe doable. And then you have this situation, which is even harder to take care of. This is what we would call a laying worker. You have no queen, and when there's no queen, the queen pheromone, one of her pheromones actually suppresses the ovary development in the workers. The workers still have ovaries. They can still lay eggs. But the pheromone from the queen suppresses the development of the ovaries in the workers. And if she's gone, then that pheromone's gone, and some workers can actually, their ovaries can develop enough to where they can actually lay an egg. But the workers never mated, can't mate. There's no way for her to mate. So all her eggs are going to be unfertilized. That means they're all drone laid eggs. And a worker is usually, since she's not as big, right? Her abdomen's much shorter than a queen. She has a hard time laying eggs clear to the bottom of the cell. And so she lays on the sidewalls. Sometimes she gets them in the bottom of the cells. But they're all over the place. The other thing she doesn't understand is there should only be one egg per cell. And you get what you see in that upper left photo where there's multiple eggs per cell. This is a laying worker. This hive is doomed. There's nothing in the hive. For this to happen, this usually takes several weeks for this to happen. This queen has been gone for several weeks. It's not going to happen in a week. This has probably been 5-6 weeks without a queen in order for that to really start to happen. So this hive's been queenless for quite a while. But when it happens and a worker, and usually it's more than one worker, it's not usually just one worker, it's usually 3 or 4 workers, that their ovaries develop enough that they start laying eggs, and then they start laying multiple eggs per cell, and they're all drones, and the other workers are trying to pull out some of the eggs. You can see in the one cell that's kind of on the second row, about third one over, there's a larvae in there, but there's also an egg in there. This hive is doomed. You have no idea which worker is the laying worker. Otherwise, you could pull her out and put in a queen. But you have no idea which one is the laying worker. And again, it may be multiple of them, multiple workers that are doing this. At this point, if you tried to introduce a queen into this hive, they would kill that queen because they think the worker, the laying worker, is queen. She's got a little bit of a queen pheromone production going on. It's not quite right, but they still think she's queen. And if you try to introduce a queen into this hive, they'll kill her. So the only thing you can really do with this hive, in my opinion, is shake it out. Sounds cruel, sounds mean. If it was a small hive that was only 4 or 5 frames of bees and you had a really, really strong hive that was, 3 or 4 boxes tall and just packed full of bees, you could probably throw 1 box with a laying worker on top of it. And that big, strong hive would go, hey, wait a minute. You're not our queen, and they would kill any worker that was trying to be a laying queen, a laying worker, and they would take care of the business. But usually these are still fairly robust. There's usually a fair amount of bees still in here. You may still have a box or even 2 boxes of bees in one of these. If you get into a laying worker scenario, though, that tells me you haven't really been in your hive probably for 6 or 7 weeks. And if you have, you missed all the signs. You haven't seen a queen or eggs for multiple weeks. And in that case, I would take this hive and I would walk out from the other hives 50, 100 feet, and I would shake all the bees on the ground and I would take the hive away. The bees that are left, they're going to fly back to where the hive was at, and they're going to go, where did home go? It's gone. And they're going to beg their way into any hive that's nearby. So in my case, I have several hives in one yard. And so they'll beg their way into one of the other hives, and you just go on with life, because there's really not much you can do to save a hive that's gone laying worker. And the other picture is telltale sign of a laying worker. Again, it looks like worker brood comb. So that's worker comb. It's, most of it's all nice and even, except where the drone cells are at. And they've had to pull those drone cells out and up a little bit. But it's all spotty. It's all over the place. And this is not what you want to be seeing in your hive. What else do I have here? Oh, well, here's a typical brood pattern. The one on the left is what I would call a good brood pattern, a really nice brood pattern. That queen's hitting just about every cell there is. There's 1 or 2 in the middle there that are skipped, but if I'm seeing that in my hive, I'm going to call that a 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, to me, that's a 5. If I'm seeing that queen is doing exactly what I want her to. The one in the middle is really spotty. It's not doing real well. And notice what's going on across the top of that frame, the top of that picture above the wording. And there's one down in the bottom left corner of that. Those are queen cells. Most likely this hive senses there's something wrong and they've started raising queen cells because they don't like the queen either. If I see the middle picture in my hive, to me, that's not good. I don't want to see that. That's not a great pattern. If I'm seeing that this time of year, that hive is automatically on my requeen list. She's going to get requeened no matter what. And the one on the far right is just bad altogether. Most of the cells are missed. They're just the one in the middle we would call a shotgun brood pattern. And the one on the right is just bad all the way around. And most likely the hive on the right, population's dwindling. It's not growing. The one in the middle might be growing a little bit, but it's probably growing really slowly. The one on the left is growing right and left, just expanding. Every time you get into it, you're going to go, oh my gosh, there's more bees. And the next time you're going to go, oh my gosh, there's more bees. The one in the middle, you're going to go, well, this is about where it was at last time. And the one on the right, you're going to go, there's less bees here than there was last time. So if you're seeing either brood pattern 1, 2, or 3 there, you know, is on the scale, if you're seeing those, time to requeen. Sooner the better. If you're seeing the one on the left, let her go. She's doing great. We could get into things to consider if you're going to raise your own queens if you want. Not sure if you want to do that.
Can I ask a question first?
By all means.
I'm still trying to work out the puzzle of what happened with my swarm. So I had bees swarm after our very first, well, actually it wasn't our first hive check. It was our like second or third hive check, but we had just thought to ourselves, that's a lot of bees. We should probably put another box on top. And yeah, I was just thrown by the time of year, I guess, because they just came out strong and they were ready to go. So they swarmed in my neighbor's yard. I managed to go catch them, brought them back, put them in a new hive. Most of them, 3/4 of them went into the box. And then like 1/4 of them stayed outside the box and sort of took up residence underneath, under the hive stand. And so I was wondering what the heck, and if maybe there were multiple queens, or maybe they decided to split, or I'm not sure what happened. The other thing is that, unfortunately those bees on the bottom did not survive because it was when we were having those crazy winds and it got super cold at night. And so they did not survive that first night. And by the time in the morning, I was going to go poke around and see if I could find a queen, but a lot of them had blown away by then. So I don't know if there was ever a queen in that little bunch, but that's my puzzle. Everyone's happy now. I wanted to split it into 2 hives, not that way, but here we are, and it happened. And so now we have 2 hives and everybody's fine. And they seem to be calm and everything, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on what happened there.
Are your new hives both queen right? They both have queens that are laying.
So the swarm hive, the second one, does not yet. They have queen cells going on in there. So I think they're working on it. They seem calm. They don't seem like they're freaking out or anything. But the original, the parent hive does have a queen laying in there and everything.
Okay. So first of all, that swarm hive, keep an eye on it.
Okay.
Realize it's queenless, and without that queen pheromone going on, after so long, now you're getting into where you could be into a laying worker state. You're not there yet. That's probably still a month away, right? At least. But just keep an eye on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. If they've got queen cells going on, we're 16 days from an egg to a queen emerging,
Right.
your 16 days, if the cells, if they just capped the cells, you're probably roughly day 8. You're halfway through that 16-day cycle. If they're not quite capped, then they're on day 6, 7, 5, somewhere in their range.
I think they were capped. We just checked a couple days ago.
If they're capped, then we know you're probably a day 8 or maybe a little more.
Okay.
So that kind of gives you a timing, okay, if I'm on day 8, that means in another week or so, then she's gonna emerge out of that cell. Give her 4 or 5 days to kind of mature. She'll go on her mating flight and give her another 4 or 5 days. So you're, 18 days, maybe 21 days, maybe 3 weeks away from having a laying queen again.
Right.
But if we start going past 21 days, now I start to really worry.
Okay. Yeah.
Something didn't go right. She got killed when she went out on her mating flights. Something, she didn't mate. We've had this cold, nasty weather. If we get that again when she's supposed to go out on her mating flight, then she may not mate at all. And
Yeah.
okay, so just keep that in mind. That was my first thought.
Yeah.
So as far as the swarm that left and you captured and come back, and then there's this group of bees underneath the hive, my guess is they probably had a virgin queen in there.
Okay.
So remember what I was talking about. When they do swarm cells, they'll frequently build multiple queen cells along the bottom.
Mhm.
Well, if all of those queens emerged essentially on the same day, sometimes the queens will usually, if they run into each other, they're going to fight. But sometimes the bees will corral them and keep them away from each other. And then all of a sudden, one of them decides, okay, I'm going to swarm. And the bees, I shouldn't say the queen decides, because she's not the one making the decision. The bees decide, we're going to swarm and we're going to take this queen with us. Sometimes it's a little hard for the bees to decide, well, who's leaving and who's staying here? And some of the bees all kind of get worked up together, and they all just leave together. And it's not uncommon in a swarm to find multiple virgin queens.
Okay.
So the first
It's a
swarm
large
that
swarm
leaves
too,
with the
so-
hive, with that first swarm that leaves, will usually leave with the original queen.
Okay.
But if you get a second swarm or a third swarm, those will always have a virgin queen in them. And sometimes they'll have multiple virgin queens in that second or third swarm. And those
Okay.
swarms are usually much smaller.
Okay.
It's not, if you're in a big apiary where a commercial apiary where there's, 30, 40 hives all in one spot, it's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 hives all swarm at the same time.
Okay.
The same time, like the same time of day, and they all go up into a tree and land from one hive, and another hive decides to swarm, and they go, oh, look, we can smell all these bees up here. This must be where we landed. And they'll land in the same spot, and you get this big, huge swarm that came from multiple hives, and there's typically multiple queens in there. 4, 5, 6, 7 queens all in there. And the trick is trying to sort them out and figure out, well, at that point, they're all friends with all the workers are friends with each other. They don't care who's queen's who. They just want a queen.
Okay. I think that must be what happened, because it was a very large swarm and they were incredibly agitated. So they were not calm at all. So it was quite the ordeal, but somehow it worked, so we're okay. So,
Good.
but yeah, thanks for going through that. I was trying to read about all the different options, and that's kind of what I was thinking, that maybe there were just multiple queens, virgin queens going on there. And then, like I said, I just felt bad that there was this little cluster that just refused to go inside the box, but maybe they weren't allowed because they had a different queen. So,
You'll have to pay attention in the following years. If
Mhm.
your hive swarms again, there's a fair to good chance that they'll land on the same spot.
okay.
I don't know why that is. Some beekeepers will say, oh yeah, this tree over here is my swarm tree. If I have a swarm in the yard, that's where they're at, year after year after year. I don't know why.
How do you, sorry. How do you stop it from swarming? Do you just have to split your hives all the time or add another box?
We kind of talked about that last time, but I don't think we have the same crowd here. So there's several things that you can do, but the best thing to do is prevent the swarm from happening in the first place, right? We don't want it to swarm.
Yeah, I guess that should have been my question, is how to prevent it. That's better said.
So let's talk a little bit about a swarm and what's going on here. So let's talk a little bit about swarm biology and what's going on here. There's a few things that kind of kick off swarming. One is increased drone production, which is happening right now in any hive that's medium to large hives. They're raising drones right now. And we'll see that from here for the next several months. They're going to continue raising drones. Swarming is usually going to take place during a major nectar flow or right before it, which is where we're at right now. Now, Laura's hive swarmed a bit early, in my opinion. Why? They thought it was time, but I thought it was a little bit early. I'm like, really? This seemed a little bit too soon, in my opinion. And then it got cold and windy, and but usually swarming is going to take place during a major nectar flow or right before it. The bees know when that happens, and we're right there. Typically, the original queen and about half to maybe even up to 70% of the bees are going to leave with the swarm. The original hives left with queen cells that are capped. That's kind of important to remember. They're left with food, but not as many bees, right? We're down 50%, maybe even down to 30% of what was used to be in the hive. The fact that the queen cells are capped is kind of one of your telltale signs as to whether your hive has swarmed or not. If you get in your hive and you're seeing capped queen cells, there's a really good chance that your hive has already swarmed and your queen is already gone. If they're not capped yet, most likely your queen is still present in the hive. And there's still a chance you can do something. Now, I got into a hive today and I had several queen cells in the hive and only one of them was capped. And I thought, do I have a queen or do I not? Just based on population that was still in the hive, I decided, yeah, I probably do. And I went through the hive twice. It took me twice, but found the queen. She was still there, but probably wouldn't be there much longer. Either today or tomorrow, they probably would have swarmed on me. So I probably just barely caught them in time. But if that queen cell is capped, there's a good chance your queen's already gone. So some of the signs, some of the signals that tell the bees that it's time to swarm are time of year, drone production. This is normal for them. The upper things are normal for them. But overcrowding in the hive, if the hive's just way overcrowded and they don't have enough room, then the bees go, we don't have enough room. We've got to move to a new home. Some of us have got to leave. So overcrowding in the hive is one of the issues, one of the factors that kind of kick off swarming, which just means that's just sheer number of bees, right? And it also means that there's no room to store incoming resources. So if you got this big hive, they're packed out in 2 boxes and they're out foraging, they're bringing back pollen, they're bringing back nectar, and they have no place to put it. That's another signal for the bees to say, oh, we need to swarm. And because they have no place to put it, they start filling the brood area with nectar and pollen, which reduces the area that the queen has to lay eggs in. So we've got this kind of double whammy going on here. The bees are really crowded. They're bumping into each other. They're just overcrowded in the box. They don't have enough room. They're bringing in resources. They don't have any place to put it. So they start filling the brood area with pollen and nectar. Now the queen doesn't have any place to lay. So they start feeding her less and she starts to skinny up in preparation for them to swarm. And because there's so many bees in the box, the queen pheromones that she is emitting, just physically, they can't get spread thin enough to get to all the bees in the box. So some of the bees are going, we don't really smell a queen anymore. Maybe we don't have a queen. Maybe we need to be raising a new queen. Just because that pheromone level, there's just so many bees that pheromone can't get spread throughout the hive. Older queens tend to swarm more than younger queens. This is part of the reason the commercial guys will replace their queens every year. This is just part of the reason, but a young queen typically does not want to swarm. So what is young queen? Well, that's kind of a bit relative. If you got a hive, brand new hive this year with a new queen that was raised this year, this spring, she doesn't want to swarm. The odds of her swarming are low. Not impossible, but very low. Now, if that queen makes it through all the way through summer, goes through winter, and comes out in the spring, and the hive's nice and strong, that queen wants to swarm. And I don't know how scientific this is, but in my opinion, that's because she's been through 2 springs. Her first original spring that she was raised in, and now she's gone through summer, winter, and now she's into her second spring. She wants to swarm. And any queen that's older than that, they're going to want to swarm. Maybe she's a 3-year-old queen. They're going to want to swarm. If you have a queen that is raised maybe later in the summer, maybe a queen that's raised in June or July, now the queen they're not going to swarm when she's raised, right? They're not going to swarm in a brand new queen is not going to swarm in June or July. Not going to happen. Now she goes through the rest of the summer, through winter, comes out the next spring. This is her first spring. She's less likely to swarm that year. Not possible, but less likely to swarm that first spring, her first spring. If she goes through another summer and another winter and comes out the next spring, now this is her second spring, she wants to swarm. So young queens don't really want to swarm, and that's the advantage of replacing your queen every year, is you'll cut down swarming. That swarming impulse doesn't eliminate it, but it does cut it down quite a bit. So swarm prevention really starts about 4 to 6 weeks prior to swarm season. Okay, so we're in swarm season right now. We're starting. So swarm prevention really started 4 to 6 weeks ago. That means 1st of April is when swarm prevention really started in order to be effective. There's things you can do still, you can still do, but so one of the things you can do is split your hive, reduce that congestion in the hive, reduce the number of bees in the hive. So one of the ways to do that is just split your hive. And I'm only showing one box here on this panel, but it could be 2 boxes. It could be more than that. And really all I've done is, if I've got maybe 2 frames of honey or 4 frames of honey in the box and I've got 6 frames of brood, I'm just dividing the brood and the honey equally to another hive. I'm not really concerned about where the queen's at. She's going to be in one box or the other, right? And I just kind of equally split everything. The only thing you have to make sure is that each hive has got to end up with a frame that has larvae in it that's 36 hours old or less. The easy way to do that is just make sure each box has eggs in it, and then you should be good. The queen's going to be in one box or the other, and you can come back in 5 days. Whichever box has eggs in it has the queen. The other one doesn't have a queen. And in 5 days, you should start seeing queen cells being formed in that box. If you're not seeing any queen cells anywhere, then they didn't start to raise a queen, and sometimes they don't. Other than that, leave them for 3 to 4 weeks and come back, and both hives, you know, the hive that was raising a queen in 3 to 4 weeks should have a new queen that's laying. The pros to this is that it's really easy. Anybody can do this. You just equally divide the brood and the resources between 2 hives and walk away. That's why they call it a walk-away split. The cons are either hive may not have enough bees to cover all of the brood. And if that's the case, then you probably split a hive that didn't need to be split. It takes a little longer than if you're going to just introduce a previously mated queen. If you bought a queen from somebody that's already mated, this is going to take a much longer process to get your hive queen right again. And there's some risk that one of the hive ends up being queenless. So that's one way to do that. Essentially, we're going to split the hive, reduce the number of bees in the hive somehow. Now, sometimes beekeepers will just go into a really strong hive and they'll pull out 2 frames of brood and give it to a weak hive. That boosts the weak hive and pulls the strong hive back a little bit to the point where they're like, okay, so we're not so crowded anymore. We're not big enough to swarm yet. So that's one way, is to deal with the population of the hive by reducing the population either through a split or just pulling frames of brood out and giving those frames to a different hive. The other thing we can take care of is space in the hive. And I don't just mean physical space. We can add another box, right, and give them more room, but that doesn't always solve the problem. I'm going to talk about a little more about that, but that doesn't always solve the problem. We don't ever want the queen to be restricted in how much she can lay. We want to give her all the space that she can handle and give her every bit of empty cell that she can have to lay in. We don't ever want that brood nest to be backfilled with nectar or pollen. If they start backfilling the brood nest, that's really the first signal that they want to swarm, or that they're going to swarm. If we can prevent that brood nest from ever being backfilled, and it just stays nice and big and gives the queen plenty of room to lay, then they don't really go into swarm mode at all. So in the fall, what happens, we've got, our cluster is usually down in the bottom box. That's the blue circle. The yellow long rectangles are honey frames, right? And we have the brood down in the bottom box. We've got maybe some honey on the side, and then we've got a box above it that's full of honey. During the winter, they're going to eat their way up through that box, those honey stores, and the cluster moves up into the second box. And they may eat all of the honey. They may not have eaten all of it. There may be still some on the sides, but typically in the spring, that brood has moved up into that top box. And the bees move up really well, but they don't move down quite as well. So if we just left this hive the way it was in the spring and just didn't really do anything, we would have the bottom box that's pretty well empty and all the bees worked up in the top box. And that's okay. Eventually, as the nectar and pollen starts coming in, they're going to put that up in the top box, and it's going to force that brood nest where the queen's laying, it's going to force it down, 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 down into the bottom box. But now that's reducing the area for the queen to lay in. She still has all the bottom box to work with, but now the top box gets backfilled with nectar and pollen. So what we can do is simply early in the spring, reverse boxes. Pull the bottom one off, put it on the top. And now all of a sudden they've got all this space above them to expand that brood nest. And the bees move up better than they move down. They will move down, but they tend to move up better. So if we do that, just simply swap boxes, all of a sudden they go, oh, well, we have all this room up above for storage of incoming nectar. And the queen's still got lots of space to lay. And this helps, but it won't prevent swarming. It can delay swarming. Sometimes it's enough for some hives to just go, okay, we're not going to swarm this year. We'll wait till next year. Sometimes it's not a guarantee, but it can help. If we can delay that swarming impulse long enough into, in our case, into June, get them through May and through most of June, if we can delay that swarming impulse long enough, then the bees will abandon the idea that they're going to swarm and they'll just quit trying. So what will happen is after we've reversed those boxes, that brood nest will actually expand, and it's given that queen more space to lay, more room to expand that brood nest, and still gives them some room to store incoming pollen and nectar. Now, there is one caveat with reversing brood boxes that you have to be careful with a little bit. If you come out of winter and into spring, and your cluster is kind of in between the boxes, there's a little bit in the bottom box and most of it's in the top box. If there's brood in both boxes, here's what can happen. If we reverse the boxes, we have a little bit of brood that ends up at the top, and most of the brood ending up clear down to the bottom of the hive. That little bit of brood that's up there in the top can get abandoned on cold nights. And if it gets abandoned, then it'll die. So we want to be careful of not splitting up the brood nest when we reverse boxes. If you're going to split the brood nest in half when you do it, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. If you knew the weather was going to be nice and warm, then yeah, maybe. But that doesn't happen in our spring. That doesn't happen in April when we're reversing these brood boxes, right? Remember, our April was up and down. It was cold, it was warm. So the other thing that we can take care of is we can deal with the population of bees, or we can deal with the space that the bees have for the queen to lay and space for the bees to store incoming nectar. This is this is one technique that I like to do for giving the bees more room to store that incoming nectar. And it's called checkerboarding. The timing on this can be a little bit tricky to get it just right. And it's just kind of, it's more feeling of what's happening every year. When's the nectar flow coming in? How strong is it? Are we going to get cold, frosty nights? It's really hard to pinpoint on this one, but let's, for discussion's sake, let's kind of go with this. So in the spring, again, our clusters moved up into that top box. The bottom box is empty. I would probably reverse these boxes and then continue on with the checkerboarding. If I don't do anything to that hive, then they backfill that top box with incoming nectar, forces the queen down into the bottom box, which is okay until they start really backfilling the bottom box. Now the queen has less space to lay, less and less and less. And we've confined her down to a space that's just not very much for her to lay in. So what I would do, and I don't show all the boxes here, but what I would do is I would reverse the boxes. I'm going to force that queen down into the bottom, and I'm going to take the box above it. Now, I'm not doing this with brood frames. I'm doing this with honey frames, right? Not brood. I'm not going to split up my brood at all. I don't want to do that. I just want to stagger my honey frames. And this would work for single brood management or double brood management, either way. I'm going to take the box above the brood nest, and I'm going to checkerboard it with drawn comb. And that's key in this case. If it's just empty foundation that doesn't have any drawn comb on it, this doesn't work. This is not what you want to be doing. But if you have drawn comb, I can take the next box up and I can start to checkerboard it. So I put an empty frame and then a honey frame that's full of honey, and then an empty frame of drawn comb and a full frame of honey. And I just go back and forth, empty, full, empty, full, empty, full, empty, full. At that point, I can put my queen excluder on if I'm using queen excluder, or if you're not, that's fine. And then I'm going to add a third box to this, and I'm going to stagger it just opposite of what I did in the box below. So if I started with an empty on one side of the box, I'm going to start with a full in the third box. Does that make sense? And now I've created this checkerboard of empty, full, empty, full, empty, full, all the way across between the two boxes. Everybody still with me?
Yep.
Now what happens is the bees don't like honey in the brood nest if they can help it. So now the honey that's in that second box, in that middle box, the bees are going to go, whoa, wait a minute, something's wrong. The queen's going to look at those empty frames and say, oh, room to lay. And she's going to lay eggs in those empty frames. And the workers are going to go, wait a minute, I have a frame of eggs and I have a frame of honey and a frame of eggs. What's this frame of honey doing right in the middle of the brood area? That's not what they want. So they're going to take that honey and they'll actually move the honey up into the third box. Well, what that does is now it opens up that second box further for the queen to lay eggs. And now she can expand her brood nest even further into the second box. and all the honey gets moved up into the third box. Now you can, and if the third box gets full, you can do this again with a fourth box. So now the third and the fourth box get checkerboarded again, full, empty, full, empty, full, empty, and you do it again. Now the queen's not going to move up into the third box because of the queen excluder, but what that does is keep that brood nest open for the queen to lay. Gives her all the room she can handle to lay eggs, and that's going to help prevent swarming. Does that help at all for swarming? So this process really starts, like I said before, this process really starts 4 to 6 weeks before the swarm season hits. In our case, that means about the 1st of April is really when you start preventing swarming from happening in May. Now, I did some of this with some of my hives, so I didn't do walkaway splits, but I did pull frames of brood out of some of my hives and gave them to other hives. And I reversed boxes earlier back in April. I reversed boxes, and I've done some of this checkerboarding with some of my hives, and most of my hives are showing signs. I have queen cups in the hives, but there's nothing in them. And that seemed to work for so far. It has worked quite well for most of my hives. I did have the one today. It got treated just like all the others, but it decided it wanted to swarm. At that point, the only thing I can do, because I caught it quick enough, is I went in and I essentially did this with it. I pulled the queen out. I found the queen, pulled her out, and a couple of frames of brood and the bees that are on them, and put her in a nuke box off to the side. Now that hive, and I left 1 or 2 of the swarm cells in the original hive, and cut down everything else. Now the original hive only has a couple of swarm cells to deal with, so they're not going to swarm 3 or 4 times. They're not going to swarm at all, really, because they know they don't have a queen now, and their population dropped, and the hive kind of goes, oh, we don't have a queen anymore. Our population dropped, and we have a couple of queen cells left. We must have swarmed already, and now the impulse to swarm again is pretty well gone. Now all I have to do is wait for the queen cells to do their thing, for those queens to emerge. One of them will go out on her mating flight and come back and take care of the other. She'll kill the other ones, or the bees will tear them down, or whatever happens. Let nature take its course then. But I managed to save my queen. She's off safely in a separate nook. She's not going to swarm because she doesn't have enough population. And hopefully I've saved my hive, and actually I made 2 hives out of the whole process. And really what I did was, there were other swarm cells. There were multiple swarm cells. There was like 5 swarm cells in that box. And I took 1 frame with some swarm cells and dropped it in a hive that didn't have a queen. And I took another frame that had a swarm cell on it and requeened a hive that I didn't like the attitude of the hive. They were a bit feisty. So I'm like, okay, not going to deal with that anymore, and killed the queen in that feisty hive and dropped in a frame that had swarm cells on it. Now, hopefully that hive will requeen. She'll come back, and as soon as her brood starts to go through the hive, the genetics from the old queen will eventually, in about 6 weeks, will all be gone. And hopefully I have a nice calm hive again, not this feisty, grumpy hive that I didn't like.
Hey, Glade,
Yep.
remind me not to get on your bad side.
When it comes to queens, I'm getting more and more ruthless with my queens. If I've got a grumpy hive that's just every time I get into it, they're just bumping me in the veil and they're all over and they're flying and they're running and that's not the kind of bees I want. I'm going to requeen that hive just as quickly as I can. If that queen's not performing the way I think she should be, her brood pattern's not great, I'm going to requeen her. Off with her head. And honestly, the more I've done that and the more I've gotten just intolerant of queens that are poor performers, the better my bees look overall. My hives just start to look better. I just I just won't put up with a queen that's not performing anymore. And it's off with her head. And it sounds kind of mean, it sounds kind of ruthless, but the more I do it, the better my bees look. Honestly, I have 1 yard with 6 hives in it. I run mediums, so keep that in mind. I'm not running deeps, but they currently have 2 honey supers on them right now. And a third box that is their honey, and it's pretty well full. And 1 honey super is maybe a third to half full. And as we kick in our nectar flow here in the next few weeks, those boxes are going to fill quickly. So yeah, I'm adding honey supers right now, but not to all of my hives. I have some that are still back in 2 boxes, which, you know, essentially less than really just 1 deep if you're running deeps. And those queens are not performing. And as soon as I raise my new queens, off with their head. Those queens will get replaced and hopefully build up enough to get them through winter. They won't make me any honey.
Hey Glade, I have another question. It might be a little off topic, but if I'm raising queens next year, what's the difference between a cell starter and a cell finisher?
Okay, if you're going to raise queens, there's several ways to do that. A cell starter is usually a queenless hive. It usually has the queen breeders that do this, they'll make a hive that is queenless. They'll pull frames of capped brood and put them in a hive by themselves. So they've never had a queen in that hive. And they'll put capped brood in that hive, and they'll wait for all that capped brood or most of the capped brood to emerge. Now what they've done is they've created a hive that has a really high population of young nurse bees. And that hive is just packed, but it doesn't have a queen. That will be the hive that, as they graft larvae into cell cups, they'll usually put, I don't know, anywhere between 30 to 45, maybe even 60 cell cups in a cell starter. Now you've got this monster hive, and I mean monster. I mean they're gonna take 7 or 8 frames capped brood and put it in the hive, wait for it to emerge. Well, if you've got 7 or 8 frames of capped brood and all that emerges, you've got about 16 frames of bees. But they don't give them room for 16 frames of bees. they give them room for 10. And now this hive is just overcrowded, but they can't swarm because they don't have any larvae. They don't have a queen. They don't have anything to make a queen out of. And they'll leave them queenless for a week to 10 days. Wait for all that brood to emerge. Now they've got all these young nurse bees ready to go. They'll feed the heck out of them. They'll make sure they've got gobs of pollen. And if they don't have incoming pollen, they'll give them pollen patties. Now, when they drop in those queen cells, that hive jumps on those queen cells because they're the only thing in the hive that they can make a queen out of. And they will draw all of those queen cells out and make queens out of all of them. So that's a cell starter. So they've started the queen cells in that hive. And they'll usually use that hive for several rounds of queen cells. They can usually do this that hive's probably good for 3 weeks. They may infuse a little bit more capped brood, young nurse bees into it over the course, but once those queen cells are formed and started to draw them out, and especially once they're capped, there's nothing left to do but to keep them warm. So the queen breeders will pull that frame out that has the capped queen cells on it and put them in a different hive to finish them off, which really all they're doing is just keeping them warm. They're not doing anything else. All the work has been done by the cell starter, but now they can turn around and drop another frame with queen cells on it right back into that cell starter hive that's still queenless, and they can raise another round of cells. And they'll probably raise 3 or 4 rounds of cells that way out of one cell starter. And then by that time, after they've raised 3, maybe 4, the bees in that hive are starting to get too old. And then they'll actually just leave one queen cell in the hive and let the hive raise a queen and put it back in their production yard, and then they'll make up another cell starter. Most of these queen breeders that are doing it, they've got, I don't know, 8 or 10 cell starters all going at the same time. And they're dropping in queen cells in those frames every day, every other day. Just depends on how many they're raising. Somebody that's raising thousands of queens, they've got numerous cell starters going. But really what you're doing is one hive is starting the cells, getting them drawn out, feeding the larvae. And then once they're past that stage, they're pulling them out and putting them in a finishing hive. And the finishing hive can actually be queen right. They'll make sure there's a queen excluder and put the queen down below, and the queen cells that they're raising above the queen excluder. If they just drop it in the hive with a queen, then the queen will probably go in and tear them all down. So they have to keep them separate. But so they usually use a cell starter that's queenless and a cell finisher that is queen right.
So do you think I could combine 2 queenless splits from my spring splits and use that 2 of my queens, and then also finish them, and then once they're done to split that queenless hive into 2 queen right hives from the queens I've raised?
From the cells you've raised? Maybe. The key to getting really good queens is nurse bees. Lots and lots and lots and lots of nurse bees. And the way you get nurse bees all together in one hive is make up a hive, and what you're making it up with is frames of capped brood. that's all just about to emerge. So I do this when I raise my queens. I will pull a frame of capped brood that's just about to emerge from several different hives. And I'll essentially go in and harvest a frame of capped brood from 7 or 8 different hives. And I'll put them in my cell starter and wait for all of those bees to emerge. 10 days. Now I have a hive that is just packed with young nurse bees. That is the key to getting really good queens. I'm also going to be feeding them some syrup, and I'm going to feed them a pollen patty. If I had gobs of fresh pollen, I would feed them fresh pollen, but I don't harvest pollen, so I don't do that. But I will make sure that they are well fed. So can you do that early in the spring? It's hard, depends on how early in the spring. We have lots of we've had lots of pollen coming in the last little while, but not tons of nectar. And weather's been iffy at best. And do we have enough drone population? In my opinion, if you're trying to raise queens, you've got to, around here, you've got to wait at least until May to even have enough drone population out there to make it worth it. Remember, those queens have to mate with hopefully 15 to 20, 25, 30 drones. That means you've probably got to have 10 times that amount of drones up and flying. And they're not mating with drones from your own hives, they're mating with drones from other hives. So you might have drones in your hive, but does somebody down the road, 3/4 of a mile away, do they have drones yet? So if you push the envelope too soon, then you don't get a good mate. She doesn't mate well enough, and then she comes back and she starts laying, everything looks good, and then all of a sudden, come August, we're in that mode of, oh, look, she ran out of sperm, and now we have a drone layer. So you won't know that you didn't get a good mating until later that summer or early next spring, and then she starts laying again, and all of a sudden she pitters out, and now it's too early in the spring for her to rebuild the nest. And so be careful, I guess is what I'm saying. If you're going to raise your own queens, one, make sure you've got a good drone population, and two, the best queens come from a hive that's just overly packed with nurse bees. Does that help, Chase?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thanks.
Okay. Lorraine?
To go along with what you're saying, I've got tons of drones, and I did a split. I'm waiting. I just did a split this weekend, or splits on all my hives, but I'm waiting to see if they will build queen cells. I found 0 queen cells.
Okay.
There were a few queen cups, but nothing charged. But as far as I know, there were eggs and everything. Tons of bees, but I don't know. I don't want them. I saw a video about drones and drone congregation areas and such. I don't know if there are, I know Yaks has some about 4 miles away and another one about 3 miles away from me, but I don't know if I don't know who else has bees right here. Drones, anyway, I don't want them inbreeding because that causes problems from that video I saw.
Right. Most likely, and this depends on location, really. And yours may be different than mine, probably is. the drones are gonna fly out a quarter to half a mile from your hive. And the queen is gonna fly out more like 3/4 of a mile to a mile, maybe even a mile and a half from the hive. So the question is, do you have somebody within maybe a mile of your hive? Are there other hives within a mile of your hive? Is kind of the question.
And that is a question, and I don't know the answer to that. We do, however, have a couple of properties that are over by Yak's hives, and I was thinking about just taking my split and moving it over there for a minute. I mean, it only takes them a few seconds, just saying.
So
Or
you could certainly do that. You could let your hive, this is a little tricky to let your hive raise their own queen cells because that means they're in swarm mode, right? But if you keep an eye on them, totally viable way to do it. Swarm cells make the best queens because the bees started the swarm cells at the right time. They've been fed the right diet from day one. Swarm cells make the best queens. And you can wait for your hive to go into that swarm mode and say, oh, look, I've got swarm cells. I'm going to take this frame with swarm cells and I'm going to make a nook out of it. And I'm going to take this frame with swarm cells and I'm going to make another nook out of it. And then you could take those nooks to a yard that's closer to one of Yak's yards, set them out there, let them be for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and wait for those queens to make sure they've mated. It may take, from the time the queen emerges, it may be 2 weeks before she's mated and laying again. But at that point, you could turn around and once she's mated and laying, now you could turn around and take them back to your other yard. You'd be just fine.
yeah, and I prevented. Sorry.
Yeah, the only tricky part is you've got to be in your hive at least once a week, checking for swarm cells. If you miss, if you go 2 weeks, in 2 weeks your hive can swarm.
Right. And so I did the split prevent uh to prevent swarms. It's the second time I've moved in this year. But like I said, there weren't any queen. What I'm doing is I'm forcing them to build well, it'll be emergency cells at this point, right?
Right.
And then so what, 5 days later, it hasn't been 5 days. So I guess in 5 days I go in and see if there are charged queen cells. And at
Right.
that point I can go ahead and move them. But I've got them in a nuke box and I'm just going to go ahead and put it in a Langstroth in a regular 10 frame and move it over there. I have to go there and check water once a week anyway. So I'll just, yeah.
Now, when they're building these, and you're absolutely right, these would be considered technically an emergency queen cell because you've pulled bees and brood into a box that doesn't have a queen and they've raised their own queen. You force them to raise their own queen. Those queen cells aren't going to be on the bottom of the frame. They're going to be up in the middle of the frame. And those are sometimes harder to find.
Well, and I assume, I mean, I kind of did something stupid, I think. This is my first rodeo, as you know. I pulled there were like 10 frames of brood, and these guys are going nuts. The hives are just probably too big, but the queens are doing great from last year. But I pulled 4 frames of brood. My eyes aren't good enough to see eggs anyway, even with glasses. So I just pulled a bunch of frames and assumed that there was probably some eggs on there. I hope there is. Anyway, 5 days. I'll look for queen cells, and if there's a whole bunch of them, I'll split them further if I need to, and or remove the queen cups or cells and
Right.
make more splits, whatever, and just take them out to somebody else's drone congregation area. They don't fly that far, and there's nobody that's that close to me around. There's nobody around here that's that close to me, period. But the only beehives I've seen are yaks. Anyway, yeah.
Well, and I know
Oh,
my hives are probably mating with drones from Yak's hives because they're gonna be the most plentiful around mine. I know of a few backyard beekeepers, but if you've only got one hive, you're contributing, yes, some to the drone population, but it's yaks. But I don't mind. I pretty well know yaks usually raise some pretty good bees. If they don't raise
right,
good bees, they don't make money.
exactly. And they're super nice guys.
Yeah.
Um, I have another question about mites if you didn't have something else.
Nope. Go ahead.
So I was a bad girl. I was all ready to put my mite away quick strips on, and I failed to do a mite check, which I wanted to do. So I didn't put it on there, and I really made him mad, and I was in a hurry to get out of there anyway. But seems I didn't do a mite check on nurse bees. I did, just as an experiment in March, I went ahead and put some drone frames into my hives. Well, they had drawn it out beautifully, and I'd seen it once before, and it was clear, full of drone brood. But I went ahead and let them emerge and do whatever they were going to do because I wasn't messing with them that day. But when I went out this past weekend, I pulled a drone frame, stuck it in the free up. I watched a few of them poke their little heads out. That was cool. But I froze the rest of them. And while we were starting the Zoom here tonight, I did a little necropsy on it, which is kind of gross. But anyway, but I pulled them out. Tell me what I'm looking for. I'm looking for mites on the drone pupae. As they're just about ready to come out, they're black because they're bees. I mean, they're dark, right? When
But they'll
my
be,
eyes aren't that good, but I've got some 3 times magnification glasses and I was wearing them. And I'm looking for little red specks about the size of a the top of the pin. I saw nothing red. Do they turn black when they're frozen? Because I didn't see one mite. I've
not,
got to be doing something wrong.
not necessarily. If you're looking for the right thing in the right spot. Not just there'll be, if there's mites, they're gonna be in any of the cells, not just the pupae that started to turn already. Right? Because once it's
I
capped,
did it,
mite's not
and
coming in,
I did a bunch of white ones also.
right? And if you're not, most likely when they're frozen, those mites are gonna fall off the pupae and they're gonna be in the bottom of the cell somewhere. So I
So
would be looking in the cell.
I assumed that, and so I turned it over. They make them at a, what, 13% angle or something.
Right?
Turned it over and gave it a good whack, and nothing fell out. Do I
No.
need to look better?
No, not necessarily. If your mite count was under control and, in really good shape last fall, then you may not have many mites starting spring, which is perfect. That's exactly what you want.
But here's the thing, Glade, and I'm still not convinced. I've got to be doing something wrong. Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have never seen one mite in all the checks we've done. I mean, we take a half a cup of nurse bees off the brood, and we stick it in some alcohol, shake it up, set it to the side, do some more looking around, shake it again, shake it a few times. After 5 minutes or whatever, okay, they ought to be nothing. Nothing. we're doing something wrong because they got to have mites.
They're there, but if you know, if you're doing your mite treatments and keeping on top of them, you can keep. I did mite washes all summer last year, and out of all my hives, I washed one mite.
Okay. So
And
it's
I
not
didn't
just
see
me.
that mite until August.
Okay.
The good thing, if it is a good thing, the good thing about our climate out here is we have these cold winters where the hive goes completely broodless. Well, the mites can't reproduce unless there's brood. And so we have this period between, I don't know, end of November clear through January, 2 months or so where there's no brood in the hive. And those mites, some of them survive, yes, but some of them die during that time. A brood break is um, a good way to slow down that mite reproduction. And if it's long enough, like our winters, man, it can kind of knock your mite numbers down quite a bit. And if you can pair that with an oxalic acid treatment during that broodless period, your mite numbers even go lower. Do they go completely to zero? Maybe, maybe not. But it's dang close. So is it possible you know, and like you say, you're not sure you've got any other beekeepers really within maybe 3 or 4 miles of you? Maybe you're not getting a lot of migration from other hives. And so you're not, you know, if you've done your treatments and you've got your mite counts way down low and you're not getting pressure from other hives around you just because there are none, you may be in one of those spots where mites are just not an issue. But that also may mean your queens don't get mated because there's nobody else around to mate with.
Right. So you know that I'm absolutely going to do a mite wash. And you know what? To be perfectly honest with you, no matter what, I'm going to do a mite treatment before I bring them back home.
Um, an oxalic acid treatment timed just right, either a dribble or a vaporization, because when you requeen a hive, you've got a period there where there's no new eggs, no new larvae going on. And if you can kind of keep track of the timing and treat them with an oxalic acid, either a dribble or a vaporization, either one, oxalic acid is extremely effective when there's no brood in the hive. So you can, if you can catch that little narrow window between the old brood emerging and the new brood being capped and do an oxalic acid treatment, man, I'd be doing it.
You know what? It scares me. I don't know anything about. I'm waiting for the strips. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid of the the requirements you got to wear. I don't know, whatever you got to wear.
The oxalic acid vaporization, you must have a respirator and
Yeah.
an N90, what is it? It's a respirator that's, the filters are set for organic acids.
Okay.
If you do
Yeah,
an
it
oxalic
sounds
acid,
complicated.
it's not as bad as it seems. If you do an oxalic acid dribble, typically they'll mix oxalic acid with vegetable glycerin, and then they'll dribble that down the frames, between the frames, right on the bees, and let the bees clean themselves off. Again, go out to the Honeybee Health Coalition website and they'll tell you how to mix the oxalic acid for a dribble and how much to apply. It's like 5 milliliters per seam, and you do 5 seams per box or something like that. I'd have to go out to their website to give you the exact details on that, but
Well, and I've seen those videos, but it looked scary to me, so I went with something that I thought I could do.
yeah. I get it. I have one of the vaporizers and I have a mask, and you do not want to do an oxalic acid vaporization without a mask.
Right.
It will wreck your lungs. And you think, well, what's it doing to my bees? They seem to tolerate it great. It doesn't seem to bother them.
Well, they don't have lungs really.
Yeah, they don't have lungs.
Thank you. I took too much time.
All right. We're a little over that 2 hour mark, so. Unless there's other questions, I think we'll call it a night.
Thank you, Glade. Bye, everybody.
Thank you guys. Very informative.
Thanks for coming on, everybody. If you've got more questions, put them in the beekeepers chat.
Hey, I was wondering for the class follow-up, you promised us a date on a Saturday or something.
Yeah, I'm watching weather and watching my schedule, trying to figure out when that might be. It looks like it's probably gonna be the 1st of June. Like June 1st is a Saturday.
So that'll be before the next Zoom meetings. So
Yeah. I'll
let us know.
sending out an email to everybody in the classes and just from my schedule, I think that's about the soonest I can do it.
Sounds cool. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.